if you have the book in front of you and you listen to the audio at 1.5 or 2 times speed, you scan, you can actually consume a book at twice the normal rate. Practice doesn't make perfect. It's a complete misunderstanding of the nature of practice. Perfect practice makes you perfect, but practice itself doesn't. The two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you discover why you were born.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
No, pleasure. Are you in Sydney?
Yes. You were working up north in Cairns, was it?
Many years ago, I was a general practitioner in Port Douglas.
Huh. And then how many years were you in Australia?
About a year or so. I was also worked in Brisbane and on Bribie. I lived on Bribie Island for a while and worked in the Caboolture medical practice. So all over Queensland.
Was it just like a good excuse to sort of work on the other side of the world?
Yeah, no, it was essentially just as a junior doctor. Quite a lot of doctors sort of come out and do a year out, overseas and stuff, just for the experience. So my wife and I actually, just not long after we met, travelled for 2 and a bit years because I'd spent 6 years at med school because I added an extra year. Did my psychology degree in a year. So I did 6 years, not 5 years. And then you do a sort of year interning. And so after 7 years, I just thought, I just need a bit of a break. So we went traveling for 2.5 years, including, working for about 9 months in Australia.
How long were you working as a GP before then pivoting and getting into the consulting work that you now do, Alan?
Well, I also worked as a medical consultant on the ward. So basically, I worked in all the sort of frontline medical trenches. So in general practice, I then worked as a senior registrar on the cardiology wards and did quite a lot of respirology. Then did a PhD in immunology. So I moved into academic medicine, and which sort of fostered an interest in neuroscience, and then so about 11 or 12 years total as a medical doctor, and then gave all that up about 25 years ago.
Before I go too deep, do you prefer Alan, Dr. Watkins?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Alan, please share with me in the audience a bit about what you're currently working on. There's so many different sort of rabbit holes I want to go down, but maybe we can just start with a brief intro before we go too deep.
So you want me to start with the intro?
Yeah.
So I'm Dr. Alan Watkins. I'm originally trained as a physician. I have a degree in psychology. I have a PhD in immunology, so sort of scientist and academic at heart. But I gave all that up about 25 years ago. And I've been working with leaders all over the world, predominantly in the corporate space for the last 20 plus years. And the connection between my first career and my second career is really the reduction of human suffering. So when I was a medical doctor, if I was on the wards, looking after patients on the wards, I could maybe had 50 patients on the ward, 150 outpatients. I discovered that I could really only affect the lives of about 200 people. And I thought, well, for me personally, it was always been about the reduction of human suffering at scale. So that really wasn't large enough. So I thought, well, I'll go and become a primary care physician, a general practitioner, because they had 2,000 patients. But what I discovered, 1,800 of them were healthy and you never saw them. So you had the same 200 again. And you saw them day after day. And again, so it wasn't a large enough scale. So when I left to work in corporations, we work with 100 multinational corporations now, and some of them have 300,000, 400,000 employees. So if we improve the quality of leadership in those organizations, we potentially affect the lives of 300,000 people. So immediately you're at scale. And it's a different sort of suffering. In medical practice, you're largely dealing with end of life and physical suffering. But in organizations, you're dealing with financial hardship or psychological suffering, but it's suffering nevertheless. And it's often a much earlier stage. So what makes this very interesting is you're operating at a much earlier stage than you would do in medical practice, where you're really operating at the end of somebody's life. So 50% of the entire budget that's spent on your health, Andy, is spent in the last 6 months of your life, over the course of your lifetime. So that's how medical practice is set up. So I wanted to get upstream. What can you do upstream? How could you help people to reduce the suffering they then experience later on in life? So it was those two reasons that I left, to reduce human suffering at scale. And there's no doubt in my mind that when you have poor quality leadership, it causes problems. And when we see that politically, we certainly see it in organizations, many walks of life. So, I get up every day to try and reduce human suffering. So I now run a company, Complete, which works with 100 multinationals and to try and help them improve the quality of leadership.
Alan, how do you go into a giant company that has 300,000 employees and through your consulting work somehow have it, you'll probably work with the top leaders and have that impact sort of disseminate throughout the whole company?
Well, it's complicated. So you've got to start with where they're at. So there's no point in going in, with a load of ideas of what they should do differently. You've got to start to think about, well, what are they currently doing, and respond to their needs. So we often go in for different reasons. So we often get called in because there's something not quite working. And a lot of the times in organizations, they see that their reason for existence is to make money, generate profit, give that profit back to shareholders. So sometimes if they're struggling to do that, or they've lost market share, or they're not growing, then those commercial reasons are often the way that we get called in. Or they've got problems with their leadership team, or they're just exhausted and struggling to personally deal with it. So there's lots of different reasons why we get asked to come in and help. And a lot of the time, these sort of things are word of mouth. So, we've been coaching one CEO who knows other CEOs. And one of his colleagues says, who do you know that's any good at, who can help? And then our name pops up, and we start talking to the new client. And we sort of come in and start to just evaluate what's going on first. So if I give you a simple example, one of the biggest companies in the Philippines asked us to try and help them because they knew that one of the many things that we do is build leadership academies. So when you're trying to improve the quality of the leadership pool in your top 200, maybe, often companies set up an academy. So they offered me a large check to set up their academy and some courses for their academy. And I said I didn't want the money, which rather surprised them for a consultancy to refuse money. And so they said, well, why would you not want the money? I said, because it would probably be the wrong thing to do. And they said, well, explain that to us. I said, well, look, you've got 5 different businesses, so different business lines, and probably what you're thinking of doing right now is cherry picking the top 20 leaders in each of those 5 businesses and sending them to the academy program. They said, yeah, that's pretty much what we were planning. I said, but how do you know those 100 people you're about to enroll are the right 100 people? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you don't know those are the right people to send on a course. So what I'd like to do is, rather than build you a course, is to evaluate who you should send as a first step. So we've got this technology called network analysis, where we'll look at how people are connected in your organization. So what we did is we sent a very brief survey, 9 questions, out to 1,000 people. And we asked their top 1,000 people, well, who do you turn to, when you want to be energized? And who do you turn to for stretching your thinking? And these 1,000 people all voted. And what we discovered is they'd only got 47 strategic thinkers in their system. So immediately we cut the cost of the program by 50%. So you haven't got 100 people, you've only got 47. And if you enroll more than the 47, all you're effectively going to do is to water down the effect. So you'll just make the course weaker because you're going to enroll 100 people. So we cut the cost that they're about to spend on their leadership academy by 50%. So it's targeting the right people. And so we'll often do things like that, which is, okay, what is it you think you need to do, and have a chat to them and try and help them to do the right thing to proceed. And it's kind of rooted in a lot of my training as a medical doctor. I'm always looking for the active ingredient. So when I was a medical doctor, I used to, one of the things, many things I did at one point was to run clinical research trials. So they're called phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And basically you're testing to see if the drug works or the treatment works. And, you run randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials, all that kind of thing. And it's amazing when you're in business how often business doesn't pursue what really works. Often they're just ticking a box so they can be seen to have done something, and they're often less concerned about whether that thing that they do works or doesn't. Whereas our approach is, no, it has to work. I mean, you're going to spend money, you're going to spend time, the intervention has to work. So I'm constantly in pursuit, because I'm voraciously curious about, well, what really works? So having read, thousands of books on leadership and neuroscience and the human condition and all of that. I mean, I calculated recently, I've done roughly 110,000 hours of study. So just to give you a context, Andy, if you're at school from the age of 5 to the age of 16, that's 14,000 hours. So I've got 110,000 hours on the clock. So I've sort of been obsessed my entire life by, well, what works for people? What will change your life? What will transform you, make you happier, healthier, more fulfilled? What actually works? And there's, of course, lots of noise out there of things that are claimed to work but don't really work. So I'm often in the pursuit of that, and we take that into organizations.
Alan, what's your current method of consuming knowledge? Do you read 20 pages every night? Is it audiobooks? Is it YouTube videos, podcasts?
Yes, to all of that. I'm voracious. So, in fact, I wrote some, for those people following me on LinkedIn, I wrote some posts recently about the 7 practices for sustainable success. So people may have heard of Stephen Covey's great book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders, came out in 1989. It's a great book, still very relevant today. But Covey talked about habits, whereas I think practices are more important, because habit is unconscious. If you have a habit, you can easily slip into bad habits because the habit itself is unconscious, i.e. you're not aware that you're doing it. You're just doing it. It's a habit. Whereas actually, I'm a big believer in conscious practice. So you practice something. So we talked about practices. And the first of the 7 practices to sustain success is mining. I mine, literally everything. A book, a podcast, this conversation, my own interior landscape. I'm constantly mining for nuggets. And I think it's amazing. So when we teach leaders, or, we coach leadership teams, we suggest that they also take this stance. And we actually use an Australian word for them, Andy. So you'll like this. We teach them the art of fossicking. Now, fossicking is something I learned when I lived in Australia, where, you go out to the Red Centre and you kick around in the dust of Kubapili, and you suddenly find an emerald like $20,000 in the soil because you've been kicking around in the dust. It's just there. And I say, look, take that principle in life. You're kicking around in the dust of a conversation, of watching something on TV, or watching a TED talk, or listening to a podcast. And how good are you at extracting value from that conversation? Now, most people aren't very good. It just sort of blows over them. So I said the first practice is that mining ability. In fact, I was down in your part of the world a few years ago in New Caledonia working with a big mining company. And they were so good at mining that they could make money out of crushing rocks that only had 3% copper. So 97% of the rock was rock, 3% was copper. In fact, a 3% copper ore, is considered quite rich. This mining company was even better than that 3%. It had a mine in Finland that could mine out 0.3%, i.e. 99.7% of that rock was rock, and only 0.3% of it was copper. They could still turn a profit. That's how good they are. If you compare that to a human being, human beings are terrible at mining. They have experiences in life and learn nothing. And so that was the first practice I was saying, is get really, really good at mining, because at any moment of your day, there's a nugget, an insight that can help you become a better human being, a better person, succeed better, be more happy, more fulfilled, more healthy. And it's amazing. These nuggets are all around us, but most people just sort of walk over them all, miss them. And so I'm absolutely religious about looking and reflecting on every single interaction, every single conversation, every thought, every feeling. What's the value of this to me? How does this help me? So I think that's a very useful skill. So I mine, wide and deep.
Alan, what's your thoughts on, say, mining through 100 pieces of content, let's say 100 books, new books, versus reading 50 books, getting the top 5 and reading those 5 10 times each? So I guess reading 100 new books versus reading 50 new books and then rereading the top 5 10 times.
I'm not an advocate to read the top 5 10 times, because if you're good at mining, you will have mined them effectively on the first time you read them. So all that does, if you have to keep reading, it just means your mining capability is not very good. It's like you put the rock through the crusher, didn't extract the copper, and you've tried to put the rock through the crusher a second, a third, a fourth time. Whereas what I'm suggesting is get really good at mining the first time. And so, and also in the top 100 books according to whom. So I'm a big believer in, the data that you encounter everywhere in life. So it's not just books, it's the internet, it's podcasts, it's conversations like this, it's interactions with, the lady in the coffee shop, it's your own thoughts about those interactions, like mining everything. Like, what have I learned in the last 5 minutes? What have I learned in the last hour? What have I learned in the last day? And in what way does that change my understanding of myself, my understanding of others, my understanding of the world? So a constant revision of your understanding of, what's going on here. So I'm religious about that, constantly thinking and reflecting and reevaluating. So you can have a clearer and clearer picture of reality. And there's no doubt, working with corporations, those people who have a better picture, who are much clearer, make much better leaders.
When I'm sort of reading a book or listening to a podcast and I'm taking notes, I'm writing on the sides of the book, my retention of the knowledge is much higher, but now I'm sort of consuming 1/3 of the amount of knowledge in the same amount of time, because now I'm stopping, I'm writing notes. So it takes twice as long to read one book. So I have the option of reading 2 books and just read it as I go and don't take notes, or read one book and sort of go at half the rate but take a lot of notes and get better retention. But I'm now getting half the sort of knowledge-ish.
Well, you may not be getting half the knowledge. You may be getting half the knowledge from the book, but 4 times the knowledge from your own reflection about the book. So it's an interaction between you and the book. And by the way, just a little tip, if you're into audiobooks, if you have the book in front of you and you listen to the audio at 1.5 or 2 times speed, and you scan, you can actually consume a book at twice the normal rate. So the audio is going faster because you can hear quicker. So rather than listening to the book at normal speed, you listen to it 1.5 or 2 times normal speed and making notes, and pause, because the insight that you're getting at that moment could be way more invaluable than reading another 50 pages. So it's really starting to become thoughtful about your mining capability, because a lot of it, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I've written 10 books, as you know. What is often said about the books, they're quite different from the way that other people write. Many business books are effectively one idea spread thinly across 200 pages, whereas my books are almost down the other end, almost 200 ideas on every page. So a lot of nuggets. I'd like to give people a lot of stuff in, and hopefully they can pick up enough that might actually help improve their lives and the lives of those people they interact with. I'm a big believer in, mine out absolutely everything you can and get good at mining and think about your mining capability and hone and improve that. You don't necessarily need to read all 200 pages of a business book if you've got the essential idea. So as you're reading, you're evaluating, is something new coming? Is something new coming? So you can skim read as well. That increases your speed. Is there anything new coming up here? Are they making a point that I've heard of? Is it novel? Where does it fit in? So when I'm mining, it's a little bit like, that industrial mining process. You're constantly evaluating the rock. Is this 0.3% copper? Is it 3% copper? Is it something else? Rather than slavishly having to go through every single paragraph, when you get good at mining, you're in the hunt of that nugget all the time.
Alan, as sort of like a curious, voracious sort of learner, how do you sort of balance the perfection of getting better at reading, improving your sleep, improving your health, improving your speech? There's so many things that you can improve on. What's your process of what you want to work on, learn, improve on for that week, that month, that year?
Well, that's a great question. So you have to have some sort of meta frames to guide your practice. And so my mentor, Ken Wilber, has written very brilliantly about this, and I'll share with you a couple of meta frames that I got from Ken. So Ken is a sort of, not just by me, but in the view of many, many people, probably one of the smartest guys on the planet, if not the smartest. So he's got the brain the size of a planet. He was reading degree level chemistry at the age of 6. He's one of those kind of guys, and he's written 60, 70 books. And one of the things he did as a young man is he read all the great psychologists' work, all the great philosophers, all the great spiritual teachers, and he realized they all had different maps of reality, of the world, of the human condition, of what it means to be alive. And so he made a map of all their maps, so a meta map, if you will. And if I just share the sort of essence of that now, he noticed there were sort of 3 dimensions to all of our experience. There's our inner world. So as I'm talking to you now, you're having thoughts and feelings about what I'm saying. So he called that your I, the inner world of, thoughts, feelings, identity, morality, virtue, all the interior phenomena. And that's separate from the interpersonal world. So as you and I are talking now, we're relating to each other. And as we're relating to each other, I'm having thoughts about the questions you're asking me. You're having thoughts about what I'm saying. So the I and the we being the interpersonal dimension, are happening simultaneously. And then the third dimension is what we're doing. So we're doing a podcast. So these 3 worlds, and the doing world, the rational, objective, observable world of phenomena out there, is called it. So these 3 dimensions, I, we, and it. So in terms of development, one of the 10 books I wrote was called 4D leadership, 4-dimensional leadership. And the 3 dimensions of I, we, and it. And the 4th dimension is how sophisticated is your I, how sophisticated is your we, and how sophisticated is your it. So in terms of, where do you focus? What are you going to improve? We say, well, look, start organizing what you're going to improve. Do you want to improve what you're doing in the world? Your effectiveness, your profitability, your commercial impact, your number of customers. Do you want to improve the relationship with your customers or the relationship with your colleagues or people in your personal life? Or do you want to become more mature and more sophisticated as a human being? So it's about balancing your focus between the I, the we, and the it. And what we've observed over the last 20, 25 years, certainly business leaders tend to excessively privilege the it. So they have what we call an it addiction. So when we ask leaders, often when we coach leadership teams for the first time, we get them to write a list of everything on their plate. So make a list of everything you're paying attention to, what you think about your business, what do you think? And they write a load of lists. And first of all, it comes out usually in a completely unstructured way, like a sort of long list of stuff without any structure. So that's the first insight, is you're not even structuring your own thinking. When we give them this structure, saying, look, let's organize this list into short-term it and long-term it, into the we, the interpersonal stuff, and into the I stuff. And what we discover, let's imagine you have 100 items, 80 to 85 of those items are short-term it. 5 or 6 of them are long-term it, 4 or 5 of them are we, and usually 0 in the I. So the balance is massively geared towards short-term doing. And the reason for that is, people get hired to do a job and they get fired if they don't do the job. So that draws the focus. So most people, even CEOs, often focus on the short-term task, target, goal, metric, tactic, the competitive radar, the top line, the bottom line, the business system, if you like, the performance management system, the operational risk, all of those things that they think they need to do that defines their job. And they're obsessed by that. But we point out, well, that's really management. That's not leadership. If you're just pulling all the levers, the day-to-day tactical levers, you're managing, you're not leading. Leadership is about all 4 of those areas: short-term it, long-term it, we, and I. And then the second insight is the balance isn't right. So in my own practice, I'm consciously mindful of getting the balance right. Am I evolving in my I? Am I improving my we? And am I improving the it? And a little kind of thought experiment you can do in the I is, if you look at who you were 6 months ago, if you're not slightly embarrassed by the person you were 6 months ago, you're probably not progressing, Andy. Have I really changed in the last 6 months? Am I any different from who I was 6 months ago? So I often joke with people about the proudest day of my life is when my wife said to me, Alan, you're not the man I married. And it was kind of a joke, right? It's like, oh, I'm delighted by that, because frankly, when she married me, I was an idiot. Hopefully I've matured a bit since then. I've grown up a bit. But what you see with many leaders, they do the opposite. They wear no change as a badge of honor. So when they take over a new team or new division or a new business, they'll often do a town hall and go, okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself. And they'll tell a story about how they've always led a certain way, like this, and they're sort of promoting the idea of consistency. I've always been like this ever since I was a young man. And that's a story of no change. Well, actually, I think that's a disaster. Actually, if you don't mature from the age of 18 to the age of 30, 40, or 50, or 60, if you don't grow up, then it's a disaster. I think the real badge of honor is how much we've changed, how much we've matured, how much wiser, more compassionate, more sophisticated we've become. That's the real badge of honor, not how little I've changed over the years.
Alan, how do you find what is the most fun, the most fulfilling for you? Because there's so many things, from research, traveling, conversations, teaching, and then building a business. How do you know that building a business is what's the most fulfilling, knowing that, the example I wrote down is the Queen died 8 months ago and no one's thought of her since, and she's made a huge impact. So for us to think that we can create a bigger impact, and even if we do in 1,000 years' time, no one's going to remember. So you want to live through life just doing what fulfills you the most. How do you find what that is?
Well, that's your purpose. So one of the coaching conversations that we have with CEOs and leaders in the C-suite, is I'll often Josh, the CEO, and say, I've got a question for you. They go, yeah, what's that? Why do you exist? Right? And it's quite a challenging question. So what do you mean, why do I exist? So why are you on the planet? What is the point of you? You know, Andy, what is the point of you? And most leaders have just not thought of that question. They haven't asked themselves that question, or if they've asked themselves that question, it's often 3 in the morning after a few whiskeys or a bottle of wine, and many people can't figure out what the answer is. What's the point of me? So here's what they usually say, right? What's the, well, I'm a business guy, I'm here to make money. To which I reply, no, that's an output of you doing your job well. It's not the reason you do this job. I mean, if you do this job well, you'll make money. You'll make money for yourself, the shareholders, and so on. That's not why you do this job, is it? Again, no, I know it's actually, you're right. You know, I don't do it for the money. So why do you do it? Again, why do I exist? If it's not for the money, you know, to be a husband and a father, you know, provide for my family and da, 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 da. I said, no, that's the point of men and the point of women, to be a wife, a mother, you know, a daughter or whatever. That's the point of men and women. That's not the point of Andy. Why does Andy exist? And if it's not to make money, and if it's not to be a man or a woman or whatever, however else you identify, then they go, procreation? No, that's the point of the species. That's not the reason you exist. So when you disallow money, you know, family and procreation, most people have no idea. They've ended up in this job, but they don't know why they're in the job. And so we'll often have a conversation with them about their personal purpose. I mean, organizations over the last 10 years have become very interested in organizational purpose, but it's vitally important to keep, you know, to drive you forward. What is the point of Andy? What is the purpose? Why are you on the planet? You know, what is the legacy you want to leave? So now uncovering your personal purpose is quite a tricky thing. It requires very careful, you know, from a very well-trained coach, very careful guidance. So what we say is we can usually boil it down to 3 words. So the reason for Andy's existence on the planet is 3 words, and the first word is I. So we only need 2 more words. But of course, there's millions of words, so you've got to get the right 2 words. But when you really discover that, what is the point of you, it changes your life. In fact, there's a lovely phrase which says the 2 most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you discover why you were born. And most people are not living their life on purpose. They're not living their life according to why they're here, because they can't. They don't know why they're here. So they don't know what their personal purpose is. So this is a very, very important conversation for leaders. Why do I exist? What is the point of me? So we'll often help them uncover that, and it will change the way that they orientate to others, the way they see their own life, you know, how they lead, and so on. So that's a really critical conversation for most people.
And I'd imagine that creates huge impact. So like, how would you teach people at scale the process of finding their purpose?
Well, there's a few clues, right? Ultimately, it requires very careful guidance to get the right answer, because you've only got 3 words, maybe 4, occasionally 2. But it requires you to really tune in to the other human being to find the right words. So let me give you an example of a guy, a coach. And again, going back to the mining company, this is the guy that was working in the mining company. He came into the coaching session one day and he said, I've really had enough of this company. I'm going to resign. And I said, oh, really, Mark? And do what exactly? He said, make furniture. Oh, so you're going to give up a 6-figure salary to make a cupboard? Yes. I said, I think we need to talk about your purpose, right? Because why would you just throw the towel in to make a cupboard, right? And we started to chat, and there are lots of clues if you know what to look for. So we started to talk about things about, you know, the best day of his life is a way of getting to the answer. So Mark, tell me about the best day of your life. You know, where are you? What are you doing? What's happening? And he started to describe this to me. Another way of getting to it is the greatest compliment and the greatest insult. So, for example, if your purpose, Andy, is I understand, just 2 words, I understand, that's the reason you're on the planet, to understand, right? And I said to you, Andy, that was really smart. You probably just brush that compliment off. Oh, thanks. I know I'm smart, but hey, whatever. But if I said, oh, that was very understanding, you go, oh, do you think so? Oh, I'm so glad you said, because understanding, the idea of understanding is so central to who you are. And likewise, if I insulted you, if I said to you, that was pretty stupid, you go, well, yeah, maybe, you wouldn't feel too hurt by that insult. But if I said to you, that wasn't very understanding, oh, don't you say that to me. I may not have explained it very well. Never tell me I'm not understanding, the insult would hurt. So the greatest compliment and the greatest insult can kind of get you closer to the truth of who you are. The best day of your life can get you closer to the truth. So there's all these, what we call probes, ways of getting to the core essence of who Andy really is. So it's a little bit like the statue of David. So when that was sculpted, the sculptor just removed everything that wasn't David. So you just chip away everything that's not true until you get to the truth of it. Who is Andy really? What's the core operating principle of Andy? And it might be, I understand. So in this guy's case, I said, look, what is it when you're having the best day of your life? Where are you? What are you doing? And he said, oh, well, I'm in West Africa. I'm stood, in the sunshine with a few geologists looking across the lay of the landscape, and we're looking at the geological charts, next to him. We're trying to figure out, whether this is a good place to mine, and whether the ore deposits and he said, oh yeah, and we were talking about that for a while, and then he said something very interesting. He said, I guess at the end of the day, I like to sort of bundle various things together, and the best engineers, the best explosive experts, the best miners, and and do the deals and fix everything up. And I said, oh, hang on a minute. Say that again. He said, what? I said, that last bit. I like to do the deals. I said, say it shorter. I do deals. I said, shorter still. Ideal. I said, that's who you are. Ideal. 2 words. That's the essence of who you are. Ideal. And the reason you're on the verge of resignation to go off and make a cupboard is you proposed a deal recently to the CEO and he rejected it. And in rejecting it, he was rejecting you. He was stopping you being you. And that's why you're unsettled. You cannot be yourself. I suggest you send the email to the CEO and tell him he was wrong to reject your deal and what you suggested. He said, oh, I can't do that. And we started arguing about whether he should or shouldn't send the email to the CEO. Eventually, I persuaded him, and he sent the email to the CEO about this deal he'd been proposing that had been rejected. And he got an email back, call me immediately. And so he started to panic. He said, oh my God, I knew I shouldn't have listened to you. I said, no, we don't know that. We don't know that. I said, give him a ring. He was off in the States with the CFO and the primary shareholder. And this guy who was basically an M&A lawyer by background picked the phone up and rang the CEO. And the CEO said to him, do you know what, Mark? I'm glad you sent me that email because I've been talking to the CFO and I think we were wrong to block your deal. In fact, I think we actually come to the conclusion it's actually a very good idea. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you £5 million or $5 million to do an evaluation survey of whether the project you propose could really work. And if the evaluation survey looks good, I'm going to give you 20 million to do a full-scale evaluation. And if that looks good, I'm then going to give you the money to start buying the assets to create this iron ore division that you suggested. And we want you to be the managing director of the new iron ore division in this company. Like everything he wanted in his life just suddenly dropped in his lap because he sang his song. He lived according to his purpose, and the world reorganized to come into line with that. So it is really life-changing. If you live your life on purpose, then it does change things. Joseph Campbell, one of my great heroes, one of my boys is called Joseph after Joseph Campbell, said the purpose of life is to find your purpose. So purpose really matters. It's motivation. So how many people listening to this podcast can say they live their life on purpose? They get up purposefully every day and they know why they're doing what they're doing in their day. Their life has a purpose and they're pursuing it with a passion. It's sad to see many people have lost their sense of meaning, have lost any sense of purpose. They're just going through the motions of their life. And that leads to mental health and unhappiness and all the sort of pathologies that we see. But imagine you could live your life with a passion and an intensity and a purpose. I mean, I watched the biopic of Tina Turner recently, and there's a woman who lived her life with a passion and a vengeance according to her purpose. So I'm a big believer in helping people to uncover why they exist.
As you're sort of talking about that, things such as, I understand, I seek, I grow, these are things that I feel like that sort of resonate a bit. But then the thing that instantly follows that is the thought of you seek, you grow, and you do this for 100 years, and then you die and everything that you've sort of built up disappears. But then the process is quite fun and fulfilling, but sad to know that when you die, it just all goes away.
Well, what makes you say it all goes away? There's lots of people who've left a legacy that doesn't go away. And those are the great leaders, so we're all stood on the shoulders of giants. I mean, Joseph Campbell, who I was just talking about, he grew up in America in the 1920s during the Great Depression. And for several years, there was no job. Fortunately, he lived on a farm, so he had things to eat and drink, but he studied 8 hours a day. He read books for years. And he was self-taught, and he became the #1 world expert on comparative religion and comparative mythology. In fact, he inspired George Lucas to Star Wars, to understand Star Wars and write Star Wars. So Joseph Campbell, widely known, and he basically read all the stories of all cultures, whether it's Australian cultures, British cultures, American cultures, Chinese cultures, Latin American cultures, Indian cultures, Middle Eastern cultures. He studied the stories that all cultures tell, and he discovered what he called the monomyth, the steps, or some people call it the hero's journey. And so his most famous book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, talks about the hero's journey. And it's a story that every single culture in the world tells itself. The characters of that story are slightly different, but Campbell realized it's all the same story. And if you look at the great movies in history, they sustain because they follow the narrative arc. And in fact, one of my 10 books called Step Change, The Leader's Journey, I sort of adapted Campbell's model and applied it to leadership. There are 12 steps and 4 phases to our journey. And so this journey is the journey of our life, the journey of self-discovery, the journey of our own improvement, our own evolution. So, you can study these things and he left, so to your point, Joseph Campbell left a legacy. So he's died in, I think, 1986 or somewhere around 85, 86, something like that. But he's left a legacy. People still talk about his stuff today. I wrote a book about it recently. So just because you die, and we can talk about death if you're interested, is all another topic, but just because you die doesn't mean your life is disappeared. Some people leave legacies, many people don't, but some people do leave very significant legacies for humanity, for the world, and Campbell's one of them.
In the story you mentioned earlier, working with that manager in New Caledonia, how did that situation come to be? Did the CEO of the company knew about you and he wanted to sort of improve certain regional sectors of his company, so he brought you in, and he had a gut feeling that maybe New Caledonia was lacking a bit and sent you towards him? Or was the manager from New Caledonia the one that reached out to you?
Sometimes the CEO, reaches out because he's heard about us, that we can increase their profit. We often do case studies because I'm a big believer if you can't prove that it's worked, it hasn't worked. So we'll write case studies on the work that we do. One retailer added 110 million to their profit in the first 18 months of us working with them. The one, quadrupled market capitalization. So we produce this stuff that's relevant to the client, saying, look, you're very interested, your focus tends to be commercial. Here's the commercial consequences of really developing your people individually or collectively. So some CEOs call us in because they've seen that data or they've heard from some people that they trust that we can do this for them. In that particular case, it wasn't the CEO at all. Mark knew somebody who knew us. And Mark was deeply unsettled on the verge of resigning to make a cupboard. So he realized that he was at this critical moment and he probably needed a bit of guidance. And so that's how we started talking to Mark. So we get called in for a whole variety of different mechanisms. But a lot of the time, it's people who've seen the impact of what we've done, and the return on investment when you get these things right is absolutely massive. In fact, I'll often say to clients, there's nothing you can spend your money on that will give you a greater return on investment than actually truly developing your people. Now, the difficulty most organizations have got is, they might sort of be potentially open to this type of help and with their leadership population, but there are lots and lots of leadership consultancies and lots of coaches out there. And one of the difficulties organizations have got is, how do you tell the good ones from the mediocre ones? How do you know? And many organizations don't know how to tell the difference between proper brain surgery and brain surgery with a spoon. They can't tell. So sometimes we have to help them understand what the difference is. So, for example, I was talking to the CFO of one of the great big accounting firms, one of the top 5 accounting firms in the world. And she said, look, I need your help with this woman. We don't know whether to sack her or promote her. I thought, that's very interesting. Why would you say that? She said, well, this lady is the particular lady I'm talking about is, she's one of the best fee earners in the London office. I mean, she brings millions of dollars of revenue into our business through the London office. But we've got 5 grievance procedures around her. I said, oh no, Margaret, I know what's happened here. I said, you gave her a coach. She said, yeah, I did give her a coach. I said, the coach taught her some skills. She said, yeah, the coach did teach her some skills. I said, it's just made her a more effective bully. That's what's happened. That's exactly what's happened. She's become a more skillful bully. And I said, that's a failure of coaching. So if you get the wrong coach in, they will teach skills, but they'll often reinforce the very problem you seek to fix, because that's what we call horizontal development, not vertical development. So we're a big believer in this sort of 4-dimensional leadership of developing Andy. If we use you as an example, let's imagine you're operating Andy 2.0. How do we make you Andy 3.0? Rather than making Andy 2.0 more skillful, Andy at 2.0 is a bit of a bully, and now you're a skillful bully, still operating at level 2.0. When we level you up and we take you to level 3.0, stuff happens when you level somebody up. When you take them up a level, often the pathology that existed at the previous level, in this example, bullying, disappears, right? And you realize the error of your ways on the previous level. So as you grow up, you look back on the person you were and you realize the counterproductive nature of the way that you were. And other things come online as you level up. You get more energy, your brain works faster, new phenomena come online that didn't even exist at the previous level. So your ability to handle complexity increases. So the way out of this sort of global leadership crisis that we have in all walks of life is to wake up and grow up, as Ken would say. So how do we help leaders to grow up, which means become more mature, wiser, more sophisticated, more compassionate? And that's what happens when you take them up a level. That doesn't happen by just bolting on more skills at the same level. It's about leveling up.
Where do you start? Like, how do you go about upgrading Andy 2.0 to Andy 3.0? Where do you usually start? What's that process like?
Right. So there's this idea from back in the days of Howard Gardner. You may have heard the idea of multiple intelligences. And this started with the realization that schools tend to focus on verbal intelligence and numerical intelligence. So maths and reading and writing, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic, so the 3 R's as they were called, which is ironic, misspelling. And then Gardner realized that there were some kids who were super bright, but weren't very good at maths or English. They were maybe good at music. Oh, so there's musical intelligence. Maybe they were good, at soccer or sport. So kinesthetic intelligence, as it's called, or visual-spatial intelligence. They were very good at reorientating 3D shapes. So Gardner realized there were multiple intelligences, and more recently, emotional intelligence, not the same as cognitive, right? So it's kind of like that old adage of IQ gets you hired, EQ gets you promoted, that kind of notion. And so Gardner sort of said there are these multiple intelligences, and now how it's described now is, think of these as lines of development, these different intelligence. So you can develop your kinesthetic capability, you can develop your musical capability, you can develop your cognitive, your emotional and social intelligence, you can develop these things. So these are lines of development, and then levels of sophistication. So are you level 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, what level? Now, there are hundreds of these lines of development. So, for example, I could, you and I could work on your cooking line of development, but that would be irrelevant because you don't run a restaurant. So what would be the point in improving that? So in most businesses, there are 8 lines of development that matter in pretty much most businesses. So to answer the question, where do you start? We look at these 8 lines of development. So which one is holding Andy back? So one of the things that we'll assess as the unique part about coaching is your energy levels. So it may not be your cognitive smarts that's holding you back. It might be just the fact that you're absolutely exhausted. And it's not your emotional intelligence that's holding you back. You are literally running on fumes. So we'll quantify that. We'll put a heart monitor on you for 3 days. You wander around at work. We record all your data. And you would be amazed what we can tell about Andy and Andy's life and the way that Andy is leading just by looking at your biology. We've got about 20 plus years experience of looking at leaders' biology when they're wandering around at work and figuring out what's really going on. So I'll tell you a couple of stories about that. I was coaching the CEO of a big credit card company, and I got her biology, and I said, look, just before we start the whole coaching process, I'm just curious to know, how's your history exam going? She said, how do you know I'm doing a history exam? I said, but you are, aren't you? She said, well, yeah, actually I am, but how do you know that? I said, oh, I can see it in your biology. I completely spooked her. She said, I don't believe you. No, you can't. There's no way you can tell I'm doing a history exam just by looking at my biology. What? No, you can't tell that. And I said, no, I can. And she said, well, how? I said, well, one of the bits of data we can extract from your biology is the fluctuations in your adrenaline levels. Now, we've seen that adrenaline levels should be high during the day when you're charging around. Most people should run high adrenaline levels. In the evening, when you're, sort of cooling down, your adrenaline levels should be lower. And then at night, they should be super low. I said, that's not what's happening with you. In fact, in the first 2 hours of your sleep, you're running an adrenaline level higher than it is during the day. And it happens in the first 2 hours. It's like your head touches the pillow and you immediately start burning fuel. Now, we see that in people who are very, what we call retrospective. Their head touches the pillow, they burn fuel as they review the entire day. Now, you've got this retrospective pattern, and you're a woman of 52 with no children. So women of 52 with no children will have a little bit of time on their hands because you've got no children. You're a very bright woman. Now, very bright women with time on their hands are usually doing some sort of exam, and given this retrospective pattern, it's going to be a history exam. It's a simple deduction. Well, that totally spooked it, right? And I said, look, the reason you've called us in to help with your leadership is, I bet you when you get your board together, you probably spend before the board meeting about an hour reviewing last month's minutes. She said, have you been talking to my secretary? I said, no, it's the same. You're constantly retrospective. And when you talk about the business, you talk about how the business was a year ago and how we want to avoid the pain of a year ago and what we're moving away from. But what you're not articulating is what you want to move towards. you're not articulating the future clearly enough. You're talking a lot about the past. You're talking about moving away, not moving towards. So we coached her to help her better articulate her strategy and her vision for the future. And what was very interesting, Andy, is 6 months later, when we checked her biology again, that retrospective pattern had disappeared. So we could objectively prove that we'd fixed it because the pattern had gone and she was leading better, and people could understand what she wanted in the future, not just what she wanted to avoid in the past. So that would be one of the things that we'll record. So where do we start with you? We'll look across these 8 lines of development and figure out which one is holding you back. So we'll often look at your emotional intelligence and your energy levels as a sort of baseline to see, are there things going on in your biology that are holding you back that you're not even aware of? So that's often where we'll start.
In that example, was that sort of pattern sort of draining her energy, and by removing it, she just had more energy throughout the day because that wasn't taking as much brain power away? Was that what the pattern caused?
That's part of it, is that she was worrying about the sort of danger and the turbulence and the mistakes of the past, and she couldn't clearly see the future. Once we helped her to see the future, and again, clarity is upstream of confidence, right? It's difficult to be confident if you're not clear. So when we helped to get really clear about what the future could look like, she then became confident. As she was confident, she burnt less energy because she was confident. So people who are confident can move forward faster and with speed. So it's a bit like trying to drive in a dense fog or trying to drive down the Bruce Highway when you can see 1,000 miles, right? You can put your foot down because you can see there's no traffic on the road and you can really move fast forward with speed, and you can drive more effectively. So, fear often will slow you down, will cause you to burn more energy. In fact, pretty much all of the negative emotions are more energy draining than the positive emotions. So if you get somebody into a positive emotional state, they can perform better, their health is better, they can move faster, they can be more clear thinking. It was a combination of factors.
So for example, when I do these podcasts, I burn a lot of energy. Like usually after these, I'm like exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
Do I sort of work on trying to optimize my listening process, what's going through my brain, try to get more present? Or do I just keep working at it and then over time I'll get used to it and I'll just grow and my energy capacity increases?
No, practice doesn't make perfect. If practice made perfect, you and I could go and drive a bucket of balls on the golfing range and we get better, and we don't. So it's a complete misunderstanding of the nature of practice. Perfect practice makes you perfect, but practice itself doesn't. In fact, there's a couple of data points on this. If you've read, who's the guy? Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell. So Malcolm Gladwell promoted this idea of anybody can be world class. You just have to put 10,000 hours more practice in. Now, the good news is that's not true. You don't need 10,000 hours to become world class. In fact, we'll often say with leadership teams, we can make you world class in 64 hours. Right? It doesn't take 10,000 hours. It only takes 10,000 hours, in my view, if you don't know what you're doing and you're dealing with idiots. Now, most leadership teams are very smart. And we know what we're doing, so 64 hours. 10,000 hours is if you're stumbling around in the dark trying to figure it out. Hit a bucket of balls for 10,000 hours. Eventually, you might figure it out. But Jeff Colvin's written a much better book than Outliers. And Jeff says there's no such thing. His book is called Talent is Overrated. There's no such thing as God-given talent. Okay. If you look at people, and if we take the example of hitting a bucket of balls on the driving range, if you stand next to, Rory McIlroy, it looks like he's hitting a bucket of balls just like you and I are. He's not. He spends 3 hours of his practice just focused on one thing, which is the orientation of his wrist at the top of his swing. That's all he's doing, just that tiny piece. And he's rotating his wrist by tiny degrees to see how that affects the way that he hits the ball. And that's all he's practicing for 3 hours. You and I are doing a zillion different things and hoping the ball goes straight. We don't even know what we're doing. We're just whacking the ball. That's not what he's doing. So he spends 3 hours on the rotation of his wrist. And then the next time he goes to the driving range, he looks at the next piece, which is the speed with which, having sort of nailed the right angle of his wrist, the speed with which his backswing comes down to the ball. And he spends 3 hours on varying the speed of his backswing until he gets that perfect. And then he spends another 3 hours looking at how open or closed his club face is to the ball. And he spends 3 hours on that. So he deconstructs this complex thing of a golf swing down to 17 separate pieces, and he gets exceptional at each piece and then chains them all back together again. So it's a very different sort of practice. So you deconstruct leadership, you deconstruct the complexity of leadership into its component parts. You get good at every single little part, and then you put Humpty Dumpty back together again. You put all the pieces back together until the overall is exceptional. So that's what perfect practice looks like. It's not practice per se, it's the ability to deconstruct a complex task into its constituent parts, get exceptional at every single constituent part, and put it all back together. And so that's, once you develop that capability, you can become much more sophisticated at any specific task.
Interesting. So if I were to sort of deconstruct conversation with the goal of trying to better sort of my energy sort of management during conversation, it's a bit of listening, trying to understand, absorbing sort of information, trying to sort of figure out what I don't understand and jotting that down so I can ask that later. Now I'm having 2 or 3 things I don't understand, so now I'm trying to decide which out of the 3 might be the most impactful question, so that uses a lot of energy. And then while I'm thinking, I'm having to actively listen, so now I'm stretching my brain into 2. So as I'm deconstructing what happens as I conversate, how do I then work on it and get better?
Well, as you say, it's a great example. So let's work this example for you. A bit of live coaching for you, Andy, is that, of course, listening, that's one of the pieces of the golf swing, right? So you could deconstruct the phenomena of listening, and is it possible to listen at a much deeper level and spend less energy doing it? And the answer to that question is absolutely. So, for example, there's this idea of active listening, which I'm not a big fan of, because you pour a load of energy and you've got to really concentrate on what people are saying. No, you don't. So it's possible to listen in a much more sophisticated way with much less energy. So let me see if I can walk you through this, just to use this as a piece of the golf swing, right? So if we talk about the listening phenomena, what are you listening for? So there are 3 levels. So you listen to the words that are said, right? The tone of those words, and then, because we're on video here, the body language. So that's level 1, tone, word, and body language. And everybody knows that of those 3, words are the least important. Words are only 7% of the message. So you don't actually have to concentrate on every single word everybody says, because that's not where most of the message is. In fact, tone is 35% and body language is 58%, which is why a video conference is better than an audio conference, and an audio is better than a text, right? Because you're getting more information, essentially. That's all level 1. And in active listening, they encourage you to actively listen to everything that's said. We say, no, don't do that because it's exhausting. So that's level 1, tone, word, body language. Now, level 2 is all the thoughts and feelings that are imbuing the tone, the word, and the body language. Now, you can't see that, but you can sense it. So you can often sense, because you might have angry body language or an angry tone, that maybe this person that you're talking to is angry or exuberant or determined or passionate or indifferent or whatever. So can you sense level 2? So how good is Andy's ability to pick up the information that's being broadcast at level 2, which is, can Andy sense what Alan is feeling and what Alan is thinking? And then there's a 3rd level, which is what we train people to access and mine, which is beneath level 2 and the thoughts and feelings, is meaning. What did Alan mean? So when you're interviewing any podcaster, what do they mean? Like, what's this story really about? Where are they going with this? What's this all about? That's meaning. Now, people, the meaning of a broadcast isn't just contained in the tone of the word, the body language, or the energy of the emotion of that. There's often a much bigger meaning. So it would be possible to train yourself, Andy, to tap into this level 3. So I'll give you a live example from people I've coached just to bring this alive. So I was teaching this to a guy that was one of the senior managers in one of the world's largest sports management companies. And he was saying to me, yeah, but Alan, sometimes there is no level 3. There is no deeper meaning in a conversation. And I went, yeah, there's always a level 3. It's just you're not detecting it. And he went, no, that's not true. Sometimes there is no level 3. I said, well, give me an example when there wasn't a level 3. And he went, well, one of my golfers rang up yesterday and he was just trying to get me to organise some taxis. I said, what did he say to you? He said, hi, Guy, it's Thomas here. Just to let you know, I'm coming into Heathrow Terminal 2 tomorrow. I need a taxi at 10 o'clock to take me to my house at Wentworth because I've got a new putter arriving and I need to be there to take the delivery of the putter. And then the following day, if you can get me a taxi back to Terminal 4 for noon, because I've got a flight to take you to Copenhagen for the opening of the Copenhagen Open and the practice rounds. Have you got all of that? And Guy said, well, it was just about taxi times. It was just service. And I said, well, clearly you've got to confirm you've got the taxi times, 10 o'clock on the first day, noon on the second day, Terminal 2, Terminal 4. You've got to confirm all that. But what he's really saying to you at level 3 is take care of me. That's what he's really saying to you, Guy. And you haven't heard it. In fact, what he's saying even below that level is, I don't think you are taking care of me. And what he's saying to you below that level is actually, I think you're taking better care of everybody else in this golf stable than me, and I'm pissed off about it. I said, I can hear all that, Guy, and I wasn't even on the phone call. And he said, oh, that's nonsense. Nonsense. He didn't say any of that. I said, no, he didn't say any of it, but that was there, and I can hear it. I suggest you go back to him and make a fuss of him, because I can tell you for a fact he is not happy with you. And he said, nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. Literally 2 days later, it's all over the back pages of the newspaper that this particular golfer is about to resign from his management group because he's pissed off with the management and the support he's getting. It took Guy 3 months to stop him leaving. The time and energy he had to then spend to repair the relationship. He could have nipped all of that in the bud if he'd have heard at level 3. So to your podcast example, you find it exhausting, because it's exhausting because you're doing this golf swing, and you're hooking it some days you're hitting it straight and all that kind of stuff, right? So you get really, really exceptional at the separate pieces. You can get very exceptional at your ability to listen, not to what's being said, but to the deeper currents in the broadcast and the interaction. You could get very much more skillful at being present in the moment, in a more energy efficient way where you haven't got to really concentrate. You're just naturally present. You're in this moment. Nothing else exists in yours and my life right now, Andy, other than our conversation. We're just present with each other. Now, you can do that in a energy efficient way. You can get better at holding the frame, which is, okay, how do I listen at the same time as ask questions, at the same time as follow a narrative arc? You can get better at improving the narrative arc. So in your preparation for whoever you've got on your podcast, you could set up a sort of series of questions. You do a bit of research and you've got some ideas which you can then pivot to depending on which way the conversation is going. So there are many pieces of the podcast construction. Just like a golf swing, you get better at all those pieces and then you chain them all together. And then you could do a 2-hour podcast. And rather than feeling exhausted at the end of the podcast, you come out punching the air, invigorated. Because, oh my God, that was a fantastic conversation. I love that conversation. I've literally got to go out now, 7 o'clock in Sydney. I've got to go and party now because I'm buzzing, right? Now that's possible. That's what we're talking about.
That was amazing, Alan. Alan, how do you find people in sort of relationships that can reciprocate all these sort of skills you have? You'd probably want someone that can listen to you at a level 3 sort of level, you'd probably want someone that has a high level in all those different lines of your life. How do you find these people?
Well, we coach coaches, right? So we've got about 30 coaches that work for me now. But we're over the next 5 years, trying to take this out much more broadly, go from 30 coaches to 1,000 coaches. So to train people up in how to do this, because all of this is the good news, all of this is trainable. You can develop, you can unlock these levels that you don't know about. It's all achievable. Most people don't realize how much untapped potential, whether they're a coach or a business leader, they don't realize how much untapped potential, particularly in the C-suite. It's very interesting. So I'll tell you a story. I was with a private equity firm some years ago, and had about 60 guys that were the senior guys in this private equity firm. So I spent sort of 5 minutes sort of warming them up to this exercise. I said, okay, so you guys are private equity. So you're pretty good business people, I would imagine. They went, yeah, we are. Yeah, we're good. I said, well, actually, wouldn't it be true to say that you're possibly the best of all business people? Well, yes, I suppose you could say that, Alan. I said, because don't you buy and sell other business people? I mean, you buy businesses, you sell business people. So they're like the cannon fodder. So aren't you better than most business? Yes. Well, I didn't like to say, Alan, but yes, we probably are the best of the business. I said, because you're like the 1% of the 1%. We are the 1% of the 1%. You're like the cream of the cream. Yes, we're the cream of the cream. I said, you're like the top of the tree. We are. Anyway, so I spent about 5 minutes heating up their ego. These are private. It wasn't difficult. They were getting very excited by how awesome they were. And I sort of kept heating them up with these compliments, saying, you're the best of the best, the 1% of the 1%, all of that. And the energy was rising in the room about how awesome they were. People started high-fiving, they were chest bumping, about how awesome they're. So I said, so you're awesome. Yeah, we're really awesome. I said, so you're right, super awesome. Yes, we are super awesome. The best, we are the best. They were like kind of cheering themselves. It was sort of all these red meat eaters. And I said, well, how awesome are you? He said, we're like really awesome. I said, yeah, but how awesome? We're super, super awesome. I said, look, how awesome. Look, I'm going to give you a scale. 0 is you haven't started, and 100 is you're the most awesome you're ever going to be in your entire life. What's your number? What do you think they said, Andy?
100.
Some of them did say 100, right? Some of them, cocky ones, went 110, right? And then the slightly smarter ones went 85, right? Because they thought, hello, he's up to something. So they went 85, right? I'd written a number on the flip chart, which I then revealed, right? So I pulled back the flip chart, and the number on the flip chart, 9, 0, 9. And there was this huge wave of offense in the room. What do you mean 9? We're not 9%. We're the awesome ones. We're 100. We're the best of the best. We're not 9. How dare you? All of this one. I said, no, you're misunderstanding me. What I'm saying to you is I can get another 91% out of you. And you're telling me I can't get any more out of you? There's virtually nothing more to come. And so what I did is I laid this trap for them, and they all fell in, right? Because they realized the right answer was there's more to come, not there's no more to come. You might as well sack me now and I'll go home because you won't get any more out of me. So we laid this trap for them. They all fell in because most people, particularly with some justification, by the way, when they get to the C-suite, they look around and they realize they're the smartest person in the room, right? Nobody else in the room is any smarter than me. I must be the best there is. And this must be as good as it gets. But what a lot of people don't realize is there's a load of untapped levels, untapped potential that they're not aware of. So how could they think that there were these other levels if nobody's ever pointed these other levels out to them? So most people operate with a view that, particularly in the C-suite, they're at the top of the tree. And it's not until we do some diagnostics and get some data to show them that there are these levels of untapped potential. So that's what kind of makes me excited is we've barely scratched the surface of how awesome human beings can become. Barely scratched the surface. So if we can have the humility to open up to the possibility that there are more levels, whether you're a CEO or even a coach, there are way more levels to unlock. And that's what makes it exciting. we can evolve and evolve and evolve and get better and better and better.
I've been sort of swinging back and forth between, I have a friend who I grew up with, childhood friend. I love spending time with him, but there isn't that, his EQ is a bit lower, so there isn't that reciprocated kindness, looking out for, he's just, he goes through life as is. And I can either sort of put in the work, sort of raise awareness, have the tough conversations, hey, when you do this, it makes me feel this, and then sort of have that constant friction and put in a lot of effort to sort of have him unlock his potential, versus find those rare people that are already really kind, really sort of have that reciprocating ability. They're far and few, and sort of lock in on them, but usually they also have a lot of friends and they have their own world and they're not as free as my childhood friend. So I'm swinging between these options and I'm like, I don't know which is better.
Well, it kind of depends on what you want to do with your life, right? I mean, we've chosen to not sing to the choir. So in our mission to help reduce the suffering of humanity, we could choose to work with people who are already enlightened, but they're already enlightened. That would be singing to the choir. And so I'm mindful of some research that was done some years ago, looking at 60,000 companies in the world. And they did some analysis of these 60,000 companies, and they discovered that 147 control the 60,000, usually through share ownership and various financial mechanisms. So 147 companies were pulling the strings of the 60,000, right? And most of these 147 companies are financial institutions, pension funds, private equity funds, venture capital funds, and so on. So 147 companies control the global economy. Now, let's imagine that there are three murky figures behind the scenes, not necessarily even the CEO in these 147, who are pulling the strings of each of those 147. So net, there are 500 men, and sadly it's men, not women. If it was women, we probably wouldn't be in such a mess. But let's imagine there's 500 men pulling the strings of the global economy. So our business is metaphorically set up to get to the 500. Right? Because if we can change the minds of those 500, then humanity has a future. If we can't change the minds of the 500, then the sixth great species extinction, which we're halfway through at the moment, will come to fruition, and humanity won't survive. So of those 500, there's quite a lot of them that it's not worth talking to, because they would be intransigent to input. I mean, they're deaf, There's no point in talking to the deaf, metaphorically speaking, right? And there are some of them who are already enlightened, who are, exceptional, who are on the journey. John Mackey, used to be the CEO of Whole Foods, would be an example of somebody who's, a pretty enlightened leader. So we deliberately set out to get to those who were not deaf and not sing to the choir. So go and speak to the ones who have the possibility to wake up and grow up. So that's what our business does, and it's not an easy thing to do, right? It's much easier to sing to the choir. So if you could find, the second example in your few and far between people on the planet who are compassionate, who are kind, but there aren't many of those. You have to hunt them down, and they're busy, right? They're busy, adding value. So it's probably the first example is looking at your friend, right? And how do you mine out more value from your friendship? Now, you might want to start with where they're at rather than start with where you're at. What's going on for this person? Why are they stuck? What's happening? What would get them unstuck? What would help them to wake up? Because, of course, your friend can't grow up if he or she doesn't first wake up. So the journey is wake up and grow up, right? So in order to wake up, you have to understand them enough. So what tends to happen in these sort of interpersonal dynamics is you might interact with them based on what's going on for you rather than what's going on for them. So if you sort of flip, it's called the me to we switch, right? So I'm going to move from a focus on me to a focus on our relationship, the we. So how does he experience or she experience your relationship? How does he or she see the world? And start with where they're at, and then figure out what would be the wake-up call for this person. And that's the fascinating thing. Different people need different wake-up calls. And so how we do that in the leadership population is get some data. So there's a phenomenon called surpriseology, right? If you can't surprise somebody, because most people go through life thinking that their view of living, being alive on the planet is correct. So I've got a view of the world, of myself, of other people, and I constantly try and reinforce that view. And that view sustains until I get some data that breaks the picture. So what we do in our business is we actively seek to break the picture, take somebody slightly out of their comfort zone and create what's in psychology terms is called cognitive dissonance. So, or you surprise them. So in business, this could look a number of different ways. So when the executive team gets some sales data they weren't expecting, oh my God, the factory in the north of the country is losing money hand over fist, and we didn't realize that for the last 6 or 8 months. Now that turbulence that's created is creating a moment, an opportunity to change and improve. So until that data comes in, we're in our comfort zone, possibly even complacent, but it's the shock of the pain of unexpected data that causes us to check our view of reality. So if you look at going back to Joseph Campbell, the 12 steps of change, step 1 is we're in our comfort zone. Step 2 is the challenge to reality. And of course, once you challenge somebody's reality, you get to step 3, you get resistance. People want to resist what you're telling them. No, the data's wrong. It's not correct. It's not as bad as we thought. Classic climate change denier, right? Which we're resisting the truth. But that's step 3. And then to get to step 4, you have to overcome the resistance, right? And so that's often the first thing that you do in coaching is, or to use your friend as an example, why aren't they getting better? Why aren't they getting kinder? Why aren't they getting more curious? Why are they so self-absorbed, right? And it's possibly because they feel deep down, maybe never said this to you, they feel threatened or insecure or unhappy for some reason. You don't necessarily know why at this point. So their whole approach to life is to defend their identity, to defend the status quo, to try and make themselves feel better. So they're protecting something. Maybe it's their own heart, right? They're defending that, and it's difficult for them to be vulnerable, to open up, because their whole stance is to defend their own integrity. So if you could start to understand that, like, why are they? What are they scared of? Because usually moving from step 2 to step 3 to step 4, people are being held back by fear of some sort. So what is it that your friend's frightened of? So that requires a very careful, skillful conversation to uncover that, if they would indeed reveal that to you. And then you're dealing with the truth of what's holding them back. So if you can reassure them and build their confidence that it's going to be okay to show some vulnerability, nothing bad's going to happen, in fact, quite the reverse, you could possibly move forward. And therefore, your friend may indeed develop into that other type of person, the more enlightened person who are few and far between. Then you get to have a much greater relationship with them, a much deeper, more profound relationship from which you both benefit.
One thing I've recently realized is that for certain feelings, I don't have enough of an understanding of vocabulary to explain it. So for example, with my friend, we had a conversation about how I'm always saying yes to all his activities, and when I invite him to things I want to do, there's always excuses, and I was able to sort of articulate that, share how it made me feel, sort of bring it up and sort of bring awareness to that issue, and that sort of created like a sealed sort of loop. But then there'll be other things, such as he really likes to send me all these conspiracy videos on why the COVID vaccine isn't good, and he knows I've gotten the vaccine, and I'm like frustrated. He keeps subtly sending me these videos, even though I don't, like, I see his point, I understand his perspective, but I don't know why I'm getting sort of a bit frustrated, and I don't know how to explain it to him. We'd had a chat, I've talked about how his view is quite biased. I was like, okay, give me why you think they sort of rushed it and why it was a good thing they pushed it out, and he wasn't able to sort of give a perspective on the other side. And I was sort of able to share my sort of unbiased view on why I think it shouldn't have been done the way it was done and why it needed to be done the way it was done. But then I didn't have the vocabulary to sort of explain to him why it sort of makes me frustrated when he constantly keeps nudging me on something that I'm pretty sort of, I don't need a nudge on.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let me ask you this then. So when you have that feeling of frustration, who created that feeling?
So it came from me. I'm trying to listen to myself and see why I'm frustrated. And then my instant solution is, okay, let me try to understand why this is, and then come to a solution, whether it's a conversation, whether it's a sort of change in perspective. That's usually what happens.
Right. So the first thing you said there, it came from me. So you are actually the architect of the frustration, not him. Right? He's not doing this to you. You're doing it to yourself. So that one insight, talk about, fossicking the nuggets in our experience and our conversations. When you truly understand that this could change your life. This one insight can change your life. In fact, we'll often teach organizations on the journey from complete ignorance to enlightenment. This point we're talking about now is probably the single, if you just could only teach one thing, this is probably the most important on the entire journey. Nobody's doing anything to anybody. He is not frustrating you. So the chemistry of frustration that's going on in your body in those moments is created by you in response to what he's doing, but you create the chemistry. You create the pressure waves, the sound waves, the heat waves, the electrical signals, the electromagnetics, all of that composite energy, which you call frustration, is created in your body by you. So that's the place to start, right? Whereas try and persuade him of something else. No. Forget him for a moment. Just deal with yourself, Andy. Fix your own house first before you try and fix his house. And in fixing your own house, it's starting to, move yourself from a state of frustration to something that's more productive. Because what happens when you're in a state of frustration, your biology becomes more chaotic. That chaotic biology, particularly the heart rate variability, creates an erratic earthquake-like signal, and that inputs your brain and it shuts your frontal lobes down. So if you watch the first TED talk I did, I pull some out of the audience and demonstrate this live. I show his biology live on screen, and this person's brain shuts down and he can't think clearly. So thinking clearly of what to say to your friend, right, is gone. Why? Because you're in a state of frustration. That state of frustration is inhibiting the quality of your own thinking. So the journey there is about you. It's not about him, it's about you. Do you even notice the frustration arising? If you do notice the frustration arising, can you do anything about that frustration? So can you move yourself out of a state of frustration? Now, most people can't do that. Most people cannot change how they feel on demand. So if I said to you, okay, in the heat of frustration, I want you now to move from the state of frustration to a state of patience, you'd probably go, yeah, how do I do that? Most people can't do it because nobody's ever taught them how to do it. So they just stay frustrated. And what's worse is they know, as you said, it starts with me. They know on some level, but you want to blame the other person for making you feel, you did it to me, you frustrated me, you did. So they point the finger. Right? They point the finger out at the other person. You're the person that's frustrated. And as I taught my 4 sons, remember when you point the finger out, 3 other fingers are pointing at the real culprit, which is you, right? So don't point the finger because the real culprit is right here. It's you. So I taught my sons that. They now point at me with 4 fingers. Anyway, you did it, Dad. It was your fault. They point at all 4 fingers. So I go, no, the journey starts with you, Andy. So you first all have to deal with the frustration. I notice I'm feeling frustrated. Obviously, that's shutting my brain down. I now need to move from a state of frustration to a state of patience, for example. So the work is with me. I need to do that because if I can get to the planet of patience, my frontal lobes turn back on, it starts to occur to me why he is thinking, low quality thoughts about vaccination, why has he been duped by, echo chambers and polarization in social media channels? How can he not realize he's being brainwashed by vested interests that are kind of polarizing him and lying to him about, the truth of da 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 da, right? How does he not realize that? Now, from a state of frustration, it won't occur to you how to unlock his thinking. But from a state of patience, you've got a much better chance. So how you break through with your friend is you first work on yourself and you develop the ability to change how you feel. So that requires you, number one, to own the feeling. This is the move that we call from victim to owner. Initially, you're the victim of him. He says some nonsense about conspiracy theories. You get frustrated. You're basically the victim of him. He is frustrating you. You're in the victim position. So if I can encourage you, Andy, to take radical ownership, take back that emotion. It's you that created frustration, not him. You did it to yourself. Now, once you own it, you can change it. If you don't own it, you can't change it. Like if you don't own your flat there, you can't change the decoration. If you own the flat, you can change the wallpaper and everything else, right? So we should own how we feel, stop blaming others for how we feel. We own how we feel, and we start to develop the skills of changing how we feel, changing from frustration to patience. Once we're on the planet of patience, we can start to probe more carefully as to why is he being brainwashed in this way? Why does he seek to believe these things? Who does he think this information is coming from? What is the purpose of those people putting out this false information? What are they hoping to achieve? Does he realize he's being manipulated? Or does he think he's being sold the truth? And on what basis does he believe this is the truth? How is he making sense of these data streams that are coming to him? And why does he believe that's more truthful than some data that you're giving him? So you're with him and getting him to explain what's going on for him. So that none of that occurs to you if you're in the state of frustration. Does that make sense?
It does. So the next sort of thought that came to mind was, I spend time with my mum, but we have very different views. She's always telling me I should buy a house, I should sell my car. And these are things that, I disagree with. And then when she brings it up, I have the options to either agree and just go along with it so I don't burn too much brain energy trying to come up with ways to show her otherwise. I can sort of disagree and voice my disagreements, and then that would then lead to me trying to explain, my perspective. I can sort of take a step back, see things from her perspective, understand why she sees the value of having a house, coming from, Vietnam, being an immigrant and seeing how property has helped her. And then with that perspective, then disagree and explain my perspective. What's the best way?
Well, again, going back to that listening to your mum, right? Which is if you can listen to level 3, so let's try that live. So she's telling you about buying a house. She says, Andy, you ought to buy a house, right? That's the word she says, and she might say that with a certain tone and body language. But at level 3, what do you think is really bothering her? What's she really saying to you?
I think she wants me to be in a safe and secure situation. She's looking out for me. She's caring for me. She just wants me to have.
So have you played that back to her?
No.
Well, there you go. So try that. So, Mum, I get the sense that you really want me to be happy, and this is about you caring for me. Is that correct? So what you do, so this is, I've written about this in the coherence book. This is called the MAP skill, right? Is you play back at level 3. So MAP is an acronym, right, for the 3 steps of the process. So step 1 is you move your attention away from all the noise in your head and the rationalizations and the self-justifications and all of that processing. Oh, here my mum goes again. Oh, this is typical. This is the usual conversation. All that noise that goes on in your head when she's saying that to you. And you literally drop your attention to the area around your heart, right? Which is where we experience positive emotion. And then the A of MAP is appreciation. So you radiate appreciation towards your mother, right? So as she's telling you what you're doing wrong with your life, you're, making with the positive vibes, you're enveloping her in this sort of positive emotional state of appreciation. that changes your biology. That opens up your frontal cortex, and you hear level 3 for the first time. And in that level 3, you hear, just as you just did, is, well, what this is really about is my mum cares for me. And that's what you play back. You don't play back you play back her, right? And you play it back not as an assertion, you play it back as an offer. So you preface it by, Mum, I get the sense that. So you're basically playing back what you sense about where she's at. I get the sense that this is about you wanting me to do well in my life and make sure I'm safe and sound and secure. And so I get the sense that this is all really about care, Mum. And you offer that back to her. Now, if you do that well, the consequence is she suddenly feels seen and heard in a way that she hasn't on every one of these conversations before. That will game change the interaction.
Now if we flip the tables, I ironically do the exact same things to my sister. On the level 3, I want to help them. On the level 1, I'm just telling them to get on social media, do this, do that, and it doesn't connect at all because I'm sort of attacking them at the level 1. At level 3, they can't really see that I just want to help them. So on the other side of it, what can I do better to sort of guide my sisters in a direction that maybe could help them be better?
Right. Well, again, start with what maybe they don't want help. Right? So big brother's telling them, right? It's a bit like telling a child, tidy your room. People don't like to be told, right? Particularly if that's not where they're at right now. So again, always start with where the other person is at. So your sister is, how's it going? And she'll go, well, it's going like this and that and that, blah, blah, blah. And then trying to get inside her mind and understand what is it that she sees. Now, as her big brother, you can see that her life would work a lot better if she did X, Y, and Z, right? So let's create a metaphor. Let's imagine there were a series of stepping stones on top of a lake. And, we'll call these stepping stones A to F, right? You're further along the journey. You're on the stepping stone F. Now you can see G, H, I, J, K, all the things that she needs to do, but she's back at A. And you're telling her, no, what you need to do is G, H, I, J. And she's going, what? What? I don't understand. What do you mean? I can't even see. What are you talking about? So you have to let go of your position and you have to retrace your steps back to step A. That's the stepping stone she's on. And get her to describe what she does see. Well, I can see B. Okay, so what's stopping you going from A to B? She has no idea where F is, and certainly nothing beyond F. So she can't see the world you're describing, right? So you go back to A, get off the mountain top, get back down into the village, and see the world where she is in the village. That would be another metaphor. You're on the top of Everest, you suddenly see with incredible clarity, you're super excited because you can see what's possible for her. She can see none of that. She's in the village at the base of the mountain, looking across a brick wall in front of her, right? And you're talking about this thing that she doesn't even understand. I mean, she might intellectually understand the words, but she has no way of thinking, well, I can't do that. I don't even know what he's talking about. Oh, God, he's always going on at me. I feel bad about myself now because I feel like I'm failing him in some way, or I'm failing as a human being because because he's at the top of Everest and blah, blah, blah. So forget all of that. Let go of what you can see. Now that takes a lot of courage, and retrace your steps and get the other person to describe what they can see, right? So that's the start of the journey. If you're a companion or as a guide to her, or as a coach to her, if you will, you've got to start with where she is, not start with where you are. That makes sense?
It does make sense. For example, Alan, with your 4 children, did you start with helping them figure out their purpose? And what if they're like, Dad, I don't want to do this exercise. Dad, I don't want to go through painful growth. Dad, I want to go for the dopamine and play this game. And then let's say you were able to retrace your steps and you're like, son, I understand that, playing games is fun, but this is the consequences. They're like, I don't care about the consequences. I just want to play the game.
That's a great question. So where does the journey start? So let me tell you a little story. When my wife and I started the business 20 years ago, the first 3 years' profits we put into a pro bono piece of work in the local schools where we live. That started off one day. I was in this meeting with this head teacher and a load of the senior staff, and I'm sitting there talking to them, basically a version of the first and second TED talk I did, which is when people are under pressure, the biology goes into chaos, the brain shuts down, a bit like when you get frustrated and you can't think clearly. So I'm telling this story, and while I'm telling them the teachers this story, there's on the door, somebody knocks the door, and one of these teachers from outside the room comes in and says, "Oh, head, can you come and sort this kid out in this classroom? This kid Dylan, he's acting up again." And the head teacher said, "No, you go and sort it out. I'm in a meeting." And the teacher who knocked the door went, "No, head, I need the head to come and sort it out. I can't keep him under control." And the head went, "No, I'm in a meeting. You go and sort," and there was a bit of a Mexican standoff as this teacher looked like she was in desperate need of help, and the head was getting frustrated that the meeting was being interrupted. But eventually this teacher refused to leave. So the head apologized and said, "Look, I'm really sorry. You'll have to just pause the meeting here. Let me go and see if I can sort this out." And the head disappeared from the room for a couple of minutes. And being very creative, like many teachers are, what the head teacher did is he got hold of this 8-year-old little kid, Dylan, and frog marched him back into our meeting room. Right? She brought this angry little kid, 8-year-old, in and went, "Alan Watkins, you're clever. You fix it." So she throws this kid, Dylan, at me, right? So I was going, hi, Dylan. Well, come in, sit down. This kid comes in, clenched fist, gritted teeth, big scowl, and he sits next to me. I said, "Well, look, we're just having a meeting. Let me just explain something. I'll come back to you in a moment, Dylan. Just sit there for a moment." And I tell the teachers that, when people are frustrated, there's no point in trying to reason with them or rationalize with them because they've got a DIY lobotomy. Their biology has wiped out their frontal cortex. So stop trying to explain to children at this point. What you can do is just show them. You can show them their own biology. And so I did this with Dylan right there. I said, "Here, Dylan, let's do this with you." And he's going like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" And I put this little clip on his earlobe and I showed him his biology on this bit of software we've got live in the room. And he's going, "What's all this?" You could see him thinking, "What's all this?" And I went, "Yeah, Dylan, look, watch that. That's your heart rate going up and down. Look, it's going up and down." And it was, of course, it's going up and down in a very erratic, like an earthquake, like a seismograph, up and down in a very erratic fashion. I said, "Look, that's what happens, when people are frustrated. Their biology is in chaos and it stops them thinking clearly." Now, what you can do here is just get them to regulate their breathing. So I put what's called the breath pacer on, and I said, "Dylan, when that bar goes up, you breathe in. When that bar goes down, you breathe out. When it goes up, you breathe in." You go, and I started to pace it. I went, and I made the noises, right? So he then started to follow. He started to look a bit baffled and confused. What was all this software? And he started to look at the software, and I was watching out of the corner of my eye. His little lungs, his chest wall were going up and down as he was sort of starting to follow this breath pacer, right? And sure enough, his biology started to change from this seismograph earthquake type picture into a sine wave, what we call a coherent sine wave, like a sinusoidal coherent wave. And as this started to happen, it literally took him about 20 or 30 seconds to do that because he was following the breath pacer. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that he'd done this, and I stopped the meeting and I went, "Wow, guys, look at this. Dylan's controlled his biology." I said, "Dylan, you've done this before, haven't you?" No, I haven't done it before. I said, "That's amazing. I've never seen a child do so well so quickly." I think, "Dylan, you're fantastic." And then the other teachers started to figure out what I was up to there, that I was praising Dylan. So, one of the teachers said, "Oh, maybe we should announce this in assembly." I said, "Yeah, we should. You've got a genius in your midst," right? Another teacher said, "Perhaps we could give him a gold star." And then all these other teachers started to pile in and say how fantastic Dylan was. And you saw this child who'd come in the room, clenched fist, clenched teeth, angry and frustrated, within the space of 2 or 3 minutes, controlling his breathing, which had controlled his biology. And then everybody started heaping him with praise. That kid suddenly inflated. He went out of that room 10 foot tall, right? And so we'd fixed his biology, his frontal lobes had come back on and completely changed the emotional state he was experiencing. Now, that all happened in 3 minutes. Now, Dylan was the youngest of 5 kids, right? He was from a broken home. His dad was in prison. His siblings used to beat up on him. His classmates and his teachers saw him as disruptive. Nobody liked him. Nothing in his life was working. But in those 5 minutes, in a life where everything was broken and nothing worked, Dylan realized there was one thing he could control, and it turned out it was him. He learned that in 5 minutes. Now, that experience got spread the whole afternoon of what had happened to this kid, Dylan, in that meeting that we had. And that afternoon, we had 12 schools sign up for the program, right? So the first thing I taught my own boys, right, and I'll give you a live example, we started to teach them some of these things from a very young age. So the breathing skill, we taught my kids from 3 years old. So my youngest, who's now 22, Charlie, when he was 3, he's got older brothers. He would come frustrated or agitated with his siblings. Dad, like that. And I'd breathe. Yeah, but breathe. Yeah, but breathe. So I wouldn't let him explain it to me until he'd sorted his breathing out. And sometimes I had to put my hand on his heart, on his chest, and get him to follow me. So I would pace his breathing live in the moment. And I wouldn't let him explain anything to me until he got his breathing sorted out. So we do that for about a minute, just like I've done with Dylan, right? And then after a minute, he'd settled his breathing, his biology had changed, his frontal lobes had come back on. I'd go, right, what do you want to tell me? And one of two things would happen, Andy. He'd either go, oh, it doesn't matter, because he wanted to get back and play. He'd let it go. Or occasionally, when it did matter, he'd get a really good explanation out and he would nail his brothers and I'd have to sort him out. So he'd either let it go or get a much more coherent explanation out. So I taught that to my boys at the age of 3. So you can teach this self-regulation. It starts with breathing and then it goes to emotional regulation, which is a much bigger issue, is you can teach this from a very young age, which is what I did with my boys. It's what we did in schools. And to this day, we're running programs in schools. This is something that they just don't teach in schools. I mean, I'm teaching it to 50-year-old executives, for goodness sake. Why? Because it wasn't taught in schools. And it's probably the single most useful lesson any human being can ever learn. Because a lot of human beings go through their life thinking somebody else is doing it. They are victims. Somebody else is, I'm a victim of my boss, of my wife, of my husband, of my kids, of my customers, of somebody, the government. Somebody's to blame for how bad I feel. Well, newsflash, nobody's to blame. We do it to ourselves. Now, if we can own it, we can change it. Once we start changing how we feel, then we can unlock the hidden potential that really exists inside of us.
If I was to think long term and if I was looking for generational, legacy, and I wanted to have 20 kids and have them be raised in, my environment, is there a high likelihood that 1 out of 20 would have the same purpose as me and would be able to take over my vision?
Well, I've done about 500 of these conversations with CEOs and different leaders, and I've never had a single repeat, right? Not one. Okay. So even though we've only got 2 or 3 words, we're all so beautifully rich and diverse and complex. None of us are really the same. Even 2 siblings can be very different. I mean, my 4 boys, they're all very different. And so everybody has a unique purpose, right? You just have to discover what it is and then live your life on purpose rather than just stumble around, being brainwashed into conspiracy theories and, manipulated by, other individuals who you don't even know, who don't have your best interests at heart. So if we don't wake up to the fact that that's going on, we never learn to grow up. So again, wake up and grow up. And if we can start to grow up, then we can become more compassionate, more kind, wise, honest, thoughtful human beings that can leave a legacy. If we don't wake up, we don't grow up, and then we can remain, fearful, confused, lost, and all those things.
One of the things you brought up about doing the pro bono for the school, something I only recently started thinking about was that, I recently got a new client and I was like, I need to shift the way I'm thinking. I got this new client, let's sort of like take my family out for dinner and let's just have a small treat. Whereas prior, when I had a win, I would be like, okay, I got this win, let's save this money, let's work harder and let's triple down. And then I've only recently been like, okay, that doesn't seem right. If I have a win, I should sort of, take a piece from the top and sort of celebrate the win versus try to double down.
Yeah, it depends what your purpose is, right? I mean, we invest the profits of our business back into the business largely. But you've got to strike a balance. You've got to strike a balance between nurturing yourself and looking after yourself. That's your I development, and reinvesting in the business. That's the it development, right? So back to I, we, and it. So am I developing my I? And that doesn't necessarily require any money whatsoever. That's reading and seeking and podcast and all those things. Am I, deepening my we relationships? Is the strength of my relationships, bonds with my mother, with my sibling, with anybody else in my life, is that becoming richer? So richness, there are three types of richness. You can have richness in the exterior world, pecuniary, financial, the big house, the big car, or you can be rich on the inside, deep levels of fulfillment, deep levels of contentment. Actually, that doesn't require any money. Deeply happy. Happiness is an interior practice, because everybody knows money can't buy you happiness. Once you get beyond, if you look at the data in the US, I think about $57,000 per annum. Beyond that, there is no increase in happiness. But if you're one-dimensional, if you only see the only exterior world, you've got to keep amplifying that it. And it's ironic. I mean, I've met lots of leaders over the years that make themselves ill in the pursuit of the financial wealth, and then end up getting ill, spending all the money they've accrued to try and get healthy on the inside, which is sort of sad and ironic at the same time. So richness can come in the I, in the we, or in the it. So it's about getting a balance right. Just excessive wealth in the it, doesn't necessarily give you any internal happiness, and doesn't improve the quality of your relationships. So the richness of your relationships, the richness of your interior landscape, the most beautiful thing is the journey of self-discovery. It's the only thing that's massive enough to make you happy forever. You buy a brand new Maserati, but somebody dings it, it gets a scratch, or the mileage is too high, it won't last. A new pair of Jimmy Choo shoes, you break the heel, or you get another. So all of these trappings of wealth or richness on the outside, they're all temporary. What abides much more is your relationships, the strength and quality of your relationships, and the evolution of yourself.
If you were to predict your performance for the rest of today, Alan, how would it differ on a day where, for example, you had this 2-hour podcast? Are you going to be less energetic for today, or is it going to be the exact same as if you read a book in the first 2 hours of your day?
Largely the second. So because I, teach these things, you get good at these things in terms of energy management. I mean, most people's experience is they start the day with a certain amount of energy and then they leak it out all day, and at the end of the day, they're tired. But it's possible to start the day and finish the day with the same amount of energy. In fact, if you manage it really well, you can finish the day with more energy than when you started, right? Now, you're looking surprised at me there, Andy, but you've done this in your life. There will have been days that went particularly well, and you're buzzing and you have to go out and party because you're feeling so high. Maybe you won a piece of business or something, right? So it's possible to have more energy at the end of the day than when you started, when you learn to manage your energy very well. And so on the well-being app we've created, it's called the Complete app. So if you go onto Google or the iStore, you can find our app. There's a free version and then there's a subscription version. But on the free version, you can look at one of these tools for managing your own energy levels. So I manage my energy levels very well. So, a lot of people who know me would say, I'm as energetic as you're finding me this morning in UK time, you're in the evening. I'm like this at 10 o'clock tonight. So, because you manage your energy very well, things give you energy. When you're fossicking all day, you get excited by things, you get invigorated by things because you're fossicking new nuggets, new insights, new experiences all the time, and it's energizing. So I have a slightly different problem, which I have too much energy. and I have to titrate it, because for others it can be a bit overwhelming. So I have to be careful with my energy. Not for me, because I've got tons of it, boundless. So if you say to a leader, look, I'm going to teach you how to have boundless, because most people have the experience you're having, which is, it's exhausting leading others and supporting others. You've got to pour energy in, and at the end of the day, you're tired, and somehow you've mysteriously got to regain that energy overnight, pour it in the next day, day after day, week after week, month after month, quarter after quarter. And most leaders go, yeah, that's my life. And I say, well, how about I show you how to have boundless energy? Is that even possible? Yeah, I'm a living example of that. Boundless energy. I mean, people say, how do you run a business and write 10 books? I'm doing 2 books this year, one on education, one on AI. How do you find the time? How do you find the energy to do all of this? Well, I practice what I preach. It's possible to manage your energy levels so well and get the balance right that you can go much faster than most people. Your mind explores quicker. You mine out nuggets, you convert those nuggets, you apply those nuggets, and you move at incredible speed. And you maintain boundless levels of energy. So all of this is possible, unlocking these hidden levels of potential in all of us.
Alan, where can people find more about what you're working on? Tell me about these 2 books, the educational book, the AI book. What are the current things that's sort of taking up a lot of your time in this chapter of your life?
They can completecoherence.com, complete-coherence.com. That's our website. They can follow me on LinkedIn, Dr. Alan Watkins on LinkedIn. They can read any of the 10 books. They can listen to this podcast. A lot of the stuff I've talked about today is in some of the books. The 2 books I'm writing, one on education with Matt Silver, because we've seen that a lot of the things we teach in businesses is because it's not taught in schools. So education's really struggling. Like, kids spend 14,000 hours at school. So how is it they come out not being able to do things? Basic things. If I had a leader for 14,000 hours, I dream about that. How do we, help teachers? How do we step change the ability of children at a young age, like I've done with my boys? So that book about education is looking at all the complexity of education, and particularly now with large language models and AI, ChatGPT, all of those things, it's going to rip through education, not only in primary school and secondary school, but also in university. Knowledge is doubling every 12 hours now, Andy. So it's impossible to keep up with the knowledge base and teach people pockets of knowledge and have them regurgitate. That's actually a broken model. So we're looking at what is the model for education in the future, given that knowledge is doubling every 12 hours. Every day, the volume of knowledge known by humanity is doubling every day. So given that, how is it possible to keep cope? So that education book is about the future of education and how we set up education in this disrupted world. And then the second book is about AI, partly because there's a lot of narratives, as you will have seen, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, all the others talking about the Armageddon scenario, the machines, the robots taking over and eradicating humanity. I'm much more optimistic. I think a different future awaits us. So I'm writing a book about AI to map out an alternative future, much more optimistic, because it really matters how we think about the evolution of AI, who codes, how they code, and what is the developmental level of the person doing all the architecture and the coding. So, if you have a white supremacist, for example, coding, don't be surprised if you get white supremacist code. If you have a Dalai Lama coding, you get a different type of code. So it matters who's constructing these systems. And, when you feed large language models, what massive data streams are they based on? If they're based on, volume data streams from 6-year-olds, you'll get very different outputs than if they're based on data streams from the wisest people on the planet. So we're going to dig into all of that in the AI book. So those are the 2 books I'm doing this year. And being a bit of a polymath, I'm also interested, in addition to running the company, I'm also looking at sort of pan-industry initiatives on climate change is something that's particularly interesting me at the moment.
Thank you so much for your time today, Alan. It was amazing. Like I could feel that I've only scratched the tip of the iceberg. You got like a heavy wealth of knowledge, and we've only went down on just one topic, and there's probably like tons of other topics that we could go down on, and I could truly see it. Like I could feel the gap and the experience and the wealth, and I'm very, very grateful to have some of your time today, and I could have went on forever, but I'm thankful for you.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a delight talking to you, and hopefully you're not feeling too tired after 2 hours.
I've learned so much, and I'm definitely going to take a lot of the lessons. Guys, if you made it this far, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Hopefully you guys got some value. I'll see you guys next week on another episode of the podcast. Peace.